Thanks for clicking. My name is Mark Mitchell. I'm a mortgage broker here in London, Ontario. I'm back after 2 weeks of holidays. Did anything change?
Demonstrators wreaked havoc in Montreal's famous Old Port.
It's been 2 weeks. With that said, I want to get right into a CMHC-backed report released last week, which called for a tax on accumulated equity. That is, the amount of equity that you gained in your home since you purchased it. With more and more reports showing that Canadian real estate is becoming increasingly unaffordable, calls are growing for the government to step in to do something to slow down the price growth. And I do expect this to be a major topic throughout 2022. So what I want to do today is briefly go over the report, mainly who gets taxed and how much, go over the implications of the report, and then briefly conclude with a discussion of the likelihood that the report's recommendations will actually be implemented, whether or not they will actually introduce this tax on your home equity.
Maybe not.
There's lots of data coming out on Canadian real estate throughout this month, and of course next week we have the inflation data set to come out, which will have a direct impact on the pace of the Bank of Canada's interest rate hikes that are expected to come out throughout 2022. And of course we will have our weekly China update every Friday detailing the real estate crisis there. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into this report. So as you've probably seen on the news since it came out last week, the report calls for annual taxes on all homes valued over $1 million. Homes valued from $1 million to $1.5 million would have a 0.2% tax. Those valued from $1.5 to $2 million would have a 0.5% tax. And all homes over $2 million would have a 1% annual tax. Now, it's important to remember that this can be a deferred tax. It's not like your property taxes, that it has to be paid every month, every year. It can be deferred and accumulated so that those taxes are owed by the time you sell your home. So if you owned your home for 5 years, you would have to pay 5 years of taxes upon that sale.
I'll pay you later.
The report argues that this tax would disincentivize homeowners from using their house as a means of tax-free savings, as a means of accumulated savings by holding on to their home throughout the years. Although the report does not explicitly state this, I do highly suspect that what they are actually hoping for is that by disincentivizing Canadians from holding on to their homes, they will further incentivize Canadians to sell their homes. Given the multiple offer scenarios that have characterized the Canadian real estate market throughout the past few years, many would-be home sellers are hesitant to get into the market. If you know that it's going to be very difficult to buy a home, you're going to be even more disincentivized from selling your home. So that I would suspect that what they're doing is trying to push people to sell their homes, to engage in that process. If you know you're going to be taxed from holding on to your home, then you might be more likely to sell that home and get into the market and maybe switch properties. Now, this won't help the overall supply problem that has characterized Canadian real estate for the past few years, but it could very well help kind of reduce those multiple offer scenarios, as there will be more homes on the market available for sale. Like I said, it won't increase the net amount of sales, but it could create more market activity, which will decrease those multiple offer scenarios, thereby helping to cool down the housing market at least a little bit. The report does stress that the proposed tax would only affect about 9% of Canadian households, Canadian homeowners, 13% in Ontario, around 20% in BC. And to that, I would say for now. If prices continue to rise, if the red-hot Canadian housing market continues to go up and up and up, if inflation continues, it really won't be long before a lot of houses that aren't worth $1 million are worth $1 million. A report just came out recently in Kitchener-Waterloo, whose average house price was around $750,000 last year, now has an average house price of over $1 million. So that's a massive, massive increase. But if this tax were proposed, if this tax did become law, then those houses would all of a sudden be subject to that post-$1 million tax. But with all of that said, how likely is this to happen? Well, CMHC says a lot of things. CMHC famously at the beginning of the pandemic said that the Canadian housing market was going to drop by 18%. It also tightened its lending standards, making it more difficult to qualify for a mortgage, only to have to back down and reverse course a few months later, as it lost a huge portion of its market share as the other private insurers didn't follow suit. So whenever CMHC says something, or CMHC-backed report says something, it's important to take it with a grain of salt. It's not necessarily going to become law just because CMHC said it.
You are speaking to me.
The government, for its part, the Trudeau government, definitely does have its own priorities. They've already talked about introducing a ban on blind bidding. It looks like they're going to follow through on that election promise. And they have also talked about getting much more tougher on real estate investors, making the qualification requirements much more difficult. So it does appear as though the government is following that track. My own personal view, my own personal opinion is that the government will pursue its own track. It's going to pursue that ban on blind bidding, and it's getting tougher on real estate investors before it introduces any new taxes. Before it introduces what is essentially a principal residence tax, which will not be met well by homeowners in Canada. We've seen this before this is essentially a principal residence tax, and it has proved to be very politically almost suicidal in the past.
It was crazy when you got huffy. I was so huffy. I got scared.
So I don't see the government pursuing that track unless they absolutely have to. And let's not forget also that the Bank of Canada is set to raise interest rates multiple times throughout the coming year. If they follow the Federal Reserve's route, we could be looking at 3 to 4 interest rate hikes. So we have a number of measures upcoming in 2022 that are probably most likely going to at least somewhat, slow down that housing market between the end of blind bidding, the real estate investors, and higher interest rates. So it's not clear to me that this is needed to slow that housing market, and it's definitely not clear that the government's going to pursue that route when trying to slow the housing market. Although I do think they are going to get very aggressive in trying to slow it. Obviously, we will have all those updates and all of the government's efforts to slow the housing market and whether or not they're effective in coming videos throughout the year. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to talking with you throughout the year, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.